if others want to create the dynamic of us versus them, I think seeking ways to break down that dynamic, that way of thinking about the issue is important because it doesn't get us anywhere.
A super annoying thing about working in clean energy is how it seems so easy for conspiracy theories and misinformation to go viral. There was that clip from the show Landman earlier this year talking about wind turbines. It went viral, even being shared by a United States senator as a gotcha to clean energy advocates. But the facts of the video were not true, none of it, yet millions upon millions of eyes took it in. Today, we're going to talk about tips on how to engage with people on all sides of the energy debate. This is Plugging In. I'm Barry Wygel. Welcome to Plugging In, powering our way to a brighter and healthier New York. I'm your host, Barry Wygel. Each episode on this podcast, we will discuss a different topic related to clean energy, explaining complex topics in a way you can understand. Become part of the community as we help to make a brighter and healthier New York.
As the sun crests on the horizon, a new day dawns in our state. A new hope for tomorrow is rising, a clean future we create. Tomorrow we breathe easier, tomorrow the skies are clear. Today we are plugging in, the future of New York is here.
Joining us on this episode of the podcast is Dominic Balog-Way, Research Associate in the Department of Communication at Cornell University and co-director at the Risk Communication Research Group. Dominic, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with some basics. What is risk communication?
Yeah, it's a funny one because that sounds like a surprisingly simple question that someone like me who co-directs the Risk Communication Research Group should be able to give you a really quick and easy answer for. The reality is that how different people, including renewable energy practitioners, advocates, etc., how they define what risk communication is really impacts practice. It really impacts how they think about the processes of communication. Most people think of risk communication, would define it as this kind of one-way process. So it might be something like a developer, a renewable energy developer might see as something they do at the end of the process. They update the local community on what they've done on their project as they go along, for example. It's often associated with outreach, disclosure, updating outsiders, and the like. But the problem with that is it's not a very good understanding of what we mean by communication. It's highly problematic. And so the literature, the work I do shifted from the 80s, 90s and beyond to looking at communication, defining risk communication around multi-way engagement. So in general, in renewable energies, we think of community engagement, thinking about this multi-way exchange between multiple different actors. And so this is important because it means that we're thinking about truly engaging communities. We're truly engaging different actors and trying to reflect that their knowledge early in the development process, rather than thinking of communication as this one-way process where we just sort of disseminate or transmit messages out. So what risk communication is really important to my work and how people should think about the topic.
So there's classes at Cornell, risk communication classes. Who are those classes for?
The main class I teach at the moment is quite large, so over 100 students class called Communication, Environment, Science and Health. And so that has about a quarter of them are communication degree students, undergraduates, but the rest of them come from across the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. So we get people who are really interested in renewable energy developments as their focus, or sustainability, or climate change. And then I have other people who might be interested in ocean health. They might be interested in biology, or others that are science and technology study undergraduates. So that comes with a number of challenges in terms of having such a diverse audience, but it also provides these opportunities because then you have lots of different students contributing their different areas. You know, some students are really interested in animal health and they can talk to other students who are really interested in renewable energy. And we can think about these concepts across different areas, which is synergistic.
It's something really everyone can kind of understand and try to use when they're communicating with people. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
So how does your work intersect with the renewable energy industry?
I've worked across lots of different policy domains the last few years. And at the moment, I've been doing a lot of stuff around renewable energy development, communication, especially community engagement, working with different actors. I heard you recently had a podcast on geothermal energy, and a lot of my work recently has been on novel geothermal energy systems. So that's looking at how can we engage communities further upstream. And by upstream, I mean earlier in the research and development process when we think about these novel renewable energy technologies. My work is really based around understanding how do different groups interpret and understand risk and benefits in the context of different renewable energy technologies. But then also, how can we improve these systems for community engagement? I think it's quite interesting to think about what is the goal of all of this. And then for me, one of the goals is not to get rid of all conflict, but it's just to have fewer but better conflicts. We're going to have opposition, we're going to have support. How can we bring people together in a more strategic and thoughtful way by drawing on the evidence we've accumulated over decades?
So if you're a developer and you're in the very earliest stages of thinking about proposing a solar project in XYZ town in upstate New York, how could you factor in risk communication into your plan or thinking?
So the way I think about risk communication around community engagement is number one is to engage with the community early. We actually have been developing with the Atkinson Center for Sustainability here at Cornell, and we've been trying to develop these recommendations for renewable energy practitioners, for community engagement practitioners writ large. And so one of them is to engage communities early. Another one is to really understand the local place that you're working with, the local dynamics of who you're working with. More fundamentally, though, as I was explaining with one-way versus multi-way communication, it's really to value the perspectives and values and preferences of local communities, rather than rejecting them as opposition or people that are in the way of this development that you've taken a long time to get a permit for, that there might be a lot of financial concerns, that actually it's really valuable to engage people. It can change the course of the development. It can improve the development itself. You can actually change what you do along the way. So there's a real value to it. There are many other recommendations I would give in this area. And that's something at the ACE New York Fall Conference. We'll be doing interviews and focus groups with practitioners to say, okay, well, we have these recommendations. We'd like to know, well, what are some of the obstacles and barriers for practitioners in using these recommendations? But as I say, there are a lot more recommendations, a lot more ways of thinking about this. But those are some of the ones that are front and center for me.
So when you're proposing a project, whether it's renewable energy, a Chipotle, or any type of infrastructure project, you have people in camps, supporters, opposition, and the opposition tends to be a lot louder at the meeting, no matter what it really is. And the supporters are either, they're supportive. You might get a couple people to show up at a town meeting. There's a lot of tacit supporters that are home, but they support the project. Why is the minority that is opposing a renewable energy project so loud? Like, what is behind that?
So I think one of the main reasons is that there are a lot more reasons why you might have opposition. So a new renewable energy development, for example, in a new town, you can think of it as this change event. That's one way I like to think about it. It has the potential to change the character of a local community. Now, that could be seen as a threat, but it also can be seen as a way of enhancing a local community, right? So a local community might say, we want to transition away from fossil fuels and we want to move towards renewable energy developments. But also people have these strong attachments to place, to their town. So I live in Ithaca, that's where Cornell University is. We ask our students at the beginning of the year to say, what do you attach to this place? What do you think of Ithaca? Funny enough, they change their answers depending if they're at the end of winter or they're at a more sunny time. They have different sort of responses, different reactions. But when you have a new renewable energy development, people might see this as threatening their place. So this is something that's in the now, that's here. Whereas if you think about support for renewable energy developments, it's often thinking much further into the future. There's a delayed gratification for what you might do, which might be, for example, okay, we're concerned about climate change, and that's why we think we need more renewable energy developments. That's why we should transition away from fossil fuels. You're not going to see that immediately. The threat isn't directly in front of you. Psychologists will refer to this as psychological distancing, that it feels like it's further away, it's not in the here and now. But a new development, when you see literally developers moving into your town and you're concerned perhaps about noise, environmental harms, changing the character of where you are. As I said before, this could be a threat to place, but it also could be a way of enhancing place. And so you would naturally expect more people to be opposed.
The famous quote, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. We've seen that in towns where these projects are being proposed where misinformation can spread like wildfire, even when it's completely untrue. How can advocates and developers use the truth to the fullest extent when they're going into a community?
So I just published an article on this topic, funny enough. It's a term we use a lot, actually, since 2016. So since the 2016 US election and the Brexit referendum, it's something that shot up in terms of its usage. And some of the critiques I have of this term and this idea around misinformation is it encourages us to think of problematic content, like messages, as the problem. And it discourages us from thinking about the broader communication ecosystem and in terms of
Mm.
all the different actions we might take where there are false and misleading messages, right? So, for example, if you are a renewable energy developer or an advocate, if you focus on false messages and how people are spreading false news, fake news, and the like, you might miss other opportunities like how can you demonstrate why you are trustworthy, why you are someone that the local community or others should come to for valuable advice. Becoming frustrated with the fact that there might be misinformation, there might be opposition people who are saying things that you disagree with, it pushes us away from encouraging meaningful engagement, for trying to create better opportunities for fair processes where we can come together and try and resolve these conflicts where people often have valid concerns. They may be misinformed, they may be ignorant of a certain type of process, but you as a developer or as a community engagement practitioner more generally may be ignorant of some of their concerns around their local place or otherwise. Perhaps I could give a quick example.
Please.
I'll take it outside of New York State. But if you look in Burgundy in France, there were these efforts to put up wind turbines. So this was especially in the rural areas. You think of the wine making regions of France. And there was a lot of protest for these wind turbines. And one of the main reasons for that was that the local community, the local French winemakers, were concerned that this might affect the rural character, might affect tourism, might affect their bottom line. And these were things that weren't engaged with seriously. It was seen as, oh, okay, you can imagine the kind of discussion we might have in New York State. Oh, you just don't want renewable energy. You just don't understand why it's important. You don't want these wind turbines. They had serious concerns that needed to be engaged with. But just saying this is fake news, this is misinformation would be misleading and it wouldn't be particularly helpful in that context. Instead, truly engaging the winemakers could have been much more effective. And it may have resulted in taking a different approach, using a different type of renewable energy technology, or showing how actually that might be able to enhance a more modern French rural countryside where winemakers are engaging with. But without that level of engagement, you end up just saying there's misinformation. They don't understand why it's important to have wind power, for example.
So, when you're a developer or advocate and you're choosing who to interact with, you only have a limited amount of time. Should you be engaging with the fiercest opposition to try to come to a middle ground there? Do you try to pick off people in the middle who have legitimate questions, like you said, even if they are misinformed, but they are honestly trying to learn? Or do you get the people that are maybe on your side to be a little more vocal?
I think one aspect of that is to make sure you give opportunities for all different voices to contribute to the engagement process. This is challenging, of course, because you don't want the strongest, most vocal minorities to grab the microphone and take over. Right? That is a challenge that requires tactics. There's guidance on how to think about that more carefully. Another approach as well is to work with trusted local groups and local leaders, not as a way of just trying to persuade people of your position, but of a way of allowing different groups, local communities, vocal minorities to listen, to get into this position where you can have a meaningful dialogue between different groups, a serious exchange of ideas, rather than people just saying, no, we don't want this. And another aspect of it as well is it's not just giving vision to people into the regulatory process, into the development process. It's also giving them voice as well, showing them that if they turn up to a public meeting, for example, they will have the opportunity to be able to speak. And that might be something you want to do quite early on, because otherwise you get people, we've all seen it before, who sit there and they think, I've just got this point I want to make and I'm not listening to you until I've been able to say it. So thinking about that, having expertise and experience with people who've done this before is exceptionally helpful as well. Knowing the literature as well is important. It is a challenging issue, though. If you do end up in a situation where you have these really vocal minorities, how you set up a new development from the beginning is incredibly important. So if you engage early and you do that with multiple actors, you give multiple people a chance to speak up, then you're less likely to have people grabbing the microphone, taking over a particular meeting, a particular development more generally.
And part of the work of ACE New York and a lot of the environmental groups is to soften the ground almost before a project might even be thought about or proposed for an area. I assume that's good, that there's education and whatnot going on before a project is even proposed. But what things should we keep in mind as we are looking to engage in a community that either doesn't have a project yet or might have one in a year or two?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a great thing you're doing that. I think one thing in particular there is to go in with an open mind, to go in and to listen. That's the first thing I teach. When I teach, was talking about my communication, environment, science, and health students. One of the earliest things we say is start by listening. And this is something that's heard, it's been said many times in terms of communication. So going in, understanding the local context first, being prepared is a key aspect of being strategic as well. You don't want to go into a local community and just say, we think that you should have renewable energy developments here and we're going to tell you why it's important. Rather than going in and finding out, well, what are their preferences? What is the character of the town? Do you understand those different issues? So having that context, understanding that is important. And I think another aspect of this is to move beyond this idea of winning. So there's this book called Beyond Winning. It's a book on mediation, legal mediation, but I love the title. I think it's a great title and it applies to conflicts of all kinds. And the idea here is of the book is to say, rather than saying, okay, we need a renewable energy development here, we've got these national priorities, we're concerned about climate change, we need to push this development forward, is to say, okay, how can we engage with the community so that they can see the benefits and we can see the benefits of this project? So one metaphor that's used is, rather than who gets a bigger slice of the pie, how can we make the pie bigger for everyone? How can we make it so that when you go in, people see the real benefits? And that might be, rather than a threat to place, that might be, this is going to enhance place. This is going to enhance your local community in some way. And also with that, of course, thinking about the different trade-offs. The preferences that developers may have, you may have when you come in, may be different from a local community. And only by understanding their context can you really respond to that in a way that's meaningful. One aspect of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, fake news, these different distinctions, is that part of the reason why it's become so problematic, why people have so many concerns about it, is because of the latest communication technologies. So one issue is that messages are now sent and received instantaneously. Online social media has enabled much more peer-to-peer instantaneous discussion online. What I would say here is that you can't get rid of it.
Right.
Social media is there, and it's something you have to engage with, right? It's something that developers, that ACE New York, that advocates, that others do have to be aware of, do have to engage with. And it provides both opportunities as well as threats. And so seeking out what the opportunities are, for example, to be able to communicate and engage as well more effectively. So for example, public meetings can be very expensive if you want to do them frequently. Are there opportunities to do this online? To do this in a way where you use social media to engage people perhaps more frequently, perhaps reach people you otherwise wouldn't reach? One danger are these efforts that a lot of people do, which is trying to respond to every single message and to get wrapped up with everything. You can't control everything that's in front of you. But what you can do is become a trustworthy voice. So when there's so many mixed messages online and social media, how can you demonstrate, depending on what your position is, depending on what your role is, how can you just demonstrate that you are a valuable source of advice that people can engage with and you are responsive as well? If others want to create the dynamic of us versus them, I think seeking ways to break down that dynamic, that way of thinking about the issue, is important because it doesn't get us anywhere.
Yeah, incredibly important stuff, and I'm sure there's much, much more we could talk about, but thankfully we'll get a chance at the ACE New York conference, which will be in a week from when this podcast releases. So, Dominic, I want to thank you so much for your time and joining us and your expertise.
Okay, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you at the conference.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Plugging In. I hope you learned something, and I hope you share this knowledge with someone else. It would be incredibly helpful if you leave us a 5-star review wherever you found this podcast. If there's a topic you would like us to cover in the future or have a question about clean energy, send us an email at podcast@aceny.org.
You can follow us on social media using the links in the show notes, or consider joining our Clean Energy Supporters mailing list at aceny.org/support. Your support is crucial to creating a brighter and healthier New York. I'll see you next time.
Tomorrow we breathe easier. Tomorrow the skies are clear. Today we are plugging in the future.